My stomach clenched into a knot of dread. I have absolutely no idea what you're talking about, I insisted, my voice trembling slightly. She released a slow, deliberate sigh, a sound that scraped against my already frayed nerves. Then with a pointed gesture, she picked up a manila folder from the polished surface of the coffee table. Then perhaps you can explain this. Each step forward felt like wading through thick mud. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat against the suffocating dread that was rapidly engulfing me. Celestine flipped the folder open with a dramatic flourish. Inside, stark against the white paper, was a bank statement. One I had never ever seen before. My eyes were drawn to a highlighted transaction, a staggering $25,000 withdrawn from one of Beatrice's accounts. The blood in my veins turned to glacial ice. That's not mine. The denial ripped from my throat, sharp and desperate. Celestine let out a soft, condescending chuckle, tilting her head, as if I were some pathetic creature squirming under a microscope. That's interesting, Lily, she purred, her voice dripping with false sympathy. Because Mom's financial advisor meticulously tracked it right back to your login credentials. That's impossible. My voice cracked, the accusation hitting harder than I intended. Beatrice took a measured step toward me, her expensive heels clicking like judgmental pronouncements against the gleaming floor. So are you suggesting someone expertly hacked into my business account? Yet there were absolutely no signs of a breach, only your access. Her gaze was unwavering, accusatory. I shook my head vehemently, a frantic bird trapped in a cage of disbelief. How in the hell was this happening? You really think I'd steal from you, that I'd be stupid enough to take money from your business account? The question was laced with disbelief and a raw, wounded plea for understanding. People do all sorts of desperate things when they're drowning, Lily. Celestine mused, her tone sickeningly sweet. Maybe you were tired of struggling. Maybe you thought no one would notice. Her eyes glittered with a cruel amusement. I whirled around to face Alistair, searching his face desperately for any flicker of belief, any sign that he wouldn't succumb to their twisted narrative. But his gaze slid away, refusing to meet mine. My stomach twisted again, a painful lurch of betrayal. You know I didn't do this, Alistair. He exhaled slowly, running a weary hand over his face. Lily, I honestly don't know what to believe. His words were a crushing blow. Something inside me fractured, a clean, sharp break. Beatrice's expression remained cold, unyielding. He had already delivered her verdict. Pack your things, she stated, her voice as hard and unforgiving as steel. You are not welcome here anymore. My hands trembled violently as I blindly threw clothes into a worn duffel bag. My childhood bedroom, once the sanctuary of warmth and familiarity, now felt suffocating, a tomb closing in around me. Behind me, the door creaked open, the sound heavy with unspoken judgment. I didn't have to turn around to know who it was. Wow, that was fast, Celestine drawled, leaning against the doorframe with a smug air of satisfaction. Guess you knew this was coming, huh? I zipped the bag with a violent jerk, the cheap metal digging into my aching fingers. Get out, I choked out the words, thick with unshed tears. Celestine laughed, the sound light and mocking. Oh, don't be like that, sis. It's nothing personal. Well, maybe a little personal. I spun around, my patience finally snapping like an overstretched rubber band. Why? My voice cracked, raw with anger and the agonizing sting of betrayal. Why would you do this to me? Celestine placed a hand dramatically over her heart, feigning wounded innocence. I didn't do anything, Lilybug. But you, on the other hand, she let the words hang in the air. A poisonous insinuation, her smirk widening with cruel delight. Mom always told you to be careful with money. Rage, hot and furious, burned through my veins, but I forced it down, refusing to give her the satisfaction of seeing me break. Footsteps approached, heavy and reluctant. I turned to see Alistair standing in the doorway. His expression unreadable, yet for a fleeting, heartbreaking moment, I saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt. Dad, I whispered, my voice a desperate plea. Please, you know I wouldn't. His jaw tightened, a muscle ticking in his cheek. You should go, Lily. A painful lump formed in my throat, choking back the sobs that threatened to erupt. Beatrice appeared behind him, holding out a crisp envelope, her face an impassive mask. This should get you by, she said, her tone almost dismissive, as if handing out a coupon. My trembling fingers fumbled with the flap. Inside lay a measly $200. That was it. That was all I was worth to them. I clenched my jaw, shoving the insulting envelope into my pocket, the thin paper a stark reminder of their utter disregard. Celestine stepped aside with a theatrical wave as I walked past her, her eyes gleaming with malice. Good luck, loser, she whispered, her laughter echoing cruelly behind me as the heavy front door slammed shut. The sound, final and absolute, The night air hit me like a physical blow, cold and unforgiving, against my skin. The light drizzle had intensified into a steady, soaking rain, instantly chilling me to the bone. I stood on the sidewalk, clutching my pathetic duffel bag. The weight of it, a physical manifestation of my shattered life. I had nowhere to go. The stark reality of it sank in heavier than I could have ever imagined. I had always known Beatrice played favorites, that Celestine could twist reality to suit her own selfish needs. But I had never in my wildest nightmares believed they would actually cast me out like this. Discard me as if I were nothing. I had spent years, a lifetime, trying to prove I was good enough for them. For what? My phone buzzed in my pocket, a single ominous text message flashing on the screen. "You'll regret this." I didn't know if it was from Beatrice or Celestine. Maybe both, their venomous words indistinguishable. The rain blurred the city lights into hazy streaks as I numbly stepped onto the bus, the cold metal of the seat seeping into my soaked jeans. I didn't look back. That grand, imposing house wasn't my home anymore. 1 year later, I returned not as the broken girl they had abandoned on a rain-soaked curb, but as someone they would never in their wildest dreams have expected. Beatrice leaned back in her plush leather chair, the picture of icy composure, yet her perfectly manicured nails tapped a frantic rhythm against the polished desk. The bank statement lying before her told a story she desperately didn't want to believe. The missing money, the supposed $25,000 that had been the catalyst for my exile, had never been in my hands. It had been meticulously traced back to Celestine's account. Her fingers curled around the incriminating paper, crumpling it slightly, her mind reeling through the catastrophic implications. If this ever got out, she would look like a fool, a gullible idiot who had thrown her own daughter out of her life based on a lie. "Celestine!" She snapped, her voice sharp with fury and a dawning sense of betrayal. Celestine waltzed into the opulent office as if she owned the place, a designer Starbucks cup clutched in one hand, her expensive phone glued to the other ear. "Yeah," she said flippantly, barely glancing at her mother. Beatrice held up the damning statement, her hand trembling slightly. "Care to explain this, Celestine barely spared it a glance before shrugging dismissively. "Oh, that." She took a leisurely sip of her latte. "Relax, mother, it's not like you can't afford it." Beatrice's nostrils flared, her face contorted with disbelief and rage. "You let me believe Lily stole from me. You sat there and watched while I threw her out into the street, Celestine rolled her eyes, utterly unrepentant. "And she's gone. It's done, no one cares." Beatrice's jaw clenched so tight she felt her teeth ache. "You're lucky I'm cleaning up your mess," she muttered, the words laced with venomous fury. Celestine merely smirked over the rim of her cup, completely unfazed. "I know." The exclusive restaurant hummed with the hushed chatter of the city's elite. A year ago, I wouldn't have dared to step foot in a place like this. Now I belonged. I sat across from a man in a flawlessly tailored suit, his keen eyes assessing me with a mixture of curiosity and respect, as he slid a legal document across the pristine white tablecloth. $2 million, he stated simply, his voice calm and assured. "A startup investment in your name. You've done exceptionally well, Miss Renard." I picked up the contract, my fingers tracing the crisp paper, flipping through the pages filled with promise. It wasn't just about the money, it was about validation, tangible proof that I had clawed my way back from absolute zero. Without a moment's hesitation, I signed my name. The elegant script, a testament to my newfound confidence. "This isn't just business for you, is it?" The investor observed, his gaze sharp and perceptive. I met his eyes, a flicker of steel in my own. "No," I replied, my voice steady and resolute. "It's deeply personal." As I stood to leave, my phone buzzed with a text message, an address. A time, a family gathering at that house. A slow smile spread across my lips. Perfect. I tucked my phone away, smoothing the front of my impeccably tailored dress. Let's see just how much had changed. The house loomed before me, imposing and unchanging. But I was no longer the same girl who had walked out of it a year ago, broken and defeated. I stepped inside, and the very air seemed to shift, a subtle tremor of unease rippling through the familiar space. Beatrice stood near the grand staircase, a crystal wine glass clutched in her hand. Her practiced smile as fake and brittle as the expensive designer necklace adorning her neck. Celestine perched on the arm of a plush sofa, her eyes darting nervously from me to her mother as she reluctantly looked up from her phone. Alistair stood by the fireplace, swirling a drink, his gaze fixed on the dancing flames, deliberately avoiding mine. An uncomfortable silence hung heavy in the air, thick with unspoken accusations and simmering resentments. "You look well, Lily," Beatrice said finally. Her tone forced a strained attempt at civility. "You don't." I replied smoothly, my voice calm and self-assured. Celestine scoffed, the sound sharp and dismissive. Well, that didn't take long. I ignored her petty jab, stepping further into the room. Every detail was exactly as I remembered it: the opulent furniture, the strategically placed lighting, even the faint cloying scent of Beatrice's signature perfume, lingering in the air. It was like walking into a meticulously preserved museum of my past. But I wasn't here to admire the exhibits. I was here to burn the whole damn place down. As I took a seat, my gaze sweeping over their uncomfortable faces, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. I wasn't leaving until they knew exactly who I had become. They had foolishly thought I'd forgotten. They had arrogantly assumed I'd forgiven. They were wrong. The dining room table was set with an almost theatrical perfection, fine china gleaming under the soft light. Crystal glasses, catching the subtle shimmer, a perfectly arranged centerpiece of white roses and lilies. But no amount of carefully curated decor could mask the palpable tension that crackled through the air like an impending storm. Beatrice sat at the head of the table, her expression serenely composed as she delicately speared a piece of asparagus with her fork. Across from her, Alistair nursed his drink in strained silence, his eyes darting around the room anywhere but at me. Celestine scrolled through her phone with exaggerated disinterest, pretending the strained atmosphere didn't exist. And me, I sat there watching them play their roles in this twisted little family drama, a silent observer ready to shatter their carefully constructed facade. So Lily, Beatrice began, her voice smooth and deceptively gentle. Tell us, what exactly have you been doing this past year? I took a slow sip of my wine, letting her loaded question hang in the air between us, savoring the anticipation. Oh, I said lightly, a hint of amusement dancing in my eyes. Surviving, thriving, actually. Beatrice's eyes flickered with something unreadable, but her carefully constructed neutral expression remained firmly in place. That's good to hear. Celestine snorted derisively. Please, you probably just got lucky with some rich guy throwing money at you. I turned my gaze to her, a cool smile playing on my lips. Interesting assumption, considering I made my own fortune. But then again, you've never been particularly adept at handling money, have you, Celestine? Celestine stiffened visibly, and for a fleeting moment, I saw it. The briefest flash of unease in her eyes. Then she made her fatal mistake. Unlike Mom, I don't have any financial difficulties, she muttered, stabbing her salad a little too aggressively. The room went utterly still. Beatrice's grip on her wine glass tightened almost imperceptibly, just enough for her knuckles to pale. Alistair finally looked up from his drink, his brow furrowed with confusion. Financial difficulties? I repeated, tilting my head innocently. Funny, I thought you had everything under control. Beatrice's reaction was immediate. Her head snapped toward Celestine with a sharp warning look that could have cut glass. Celestine tried to backtrack, her voice suddenly flustered. I just meant things have been a little tight lately, that's all. I deliberately set my fork down, the clink echoing in the tense silence. Oh, you mean the missing money? Celestine's face drained of all color, leaving her looking pale and sickly. Beatrice's expression remained unreadable, a carefully constructed mask. But I could see the subtle shift in her posture, the almost imperceptible way she suddenly seemed more alert, more guarded. Alistair looked from one to the other, his frown deepening with dawning suspicion. What money? He asked, his voice low and questioning. I leaned forward, resting my elbows on the polished table, my gaze unwavering. Dad, did you know that the $1,000 I was accused of stealing last year wasn't actually missing? He blinked, his confusion evident. What? Beatrice's voice cut in smooth as ever, attempting to regain control of the rapidly unraveling situation. Lily, enough. I ignored her, my focus locked on Celestine. Because it wasn't me, I stated, my voice clear and steady, and so does Dad. The elegant dining table was no longer a setting for a polite family dinner. It had become a battlefield. Beatrice's voice was sharp, laced with a desperate attempt to maintain authority. This is ridiculous, Lily, you're making things up. Celestine was visibly trembling now, her carefully constructed composure crumbling. She's lying, Mom. She's trying to turn you against me. Alistair slammed his glass down on the table, the sharp crack shattering the tense silence. Enough, I want the truth. I reached into my purse, my fingers closing around a folded piece of paper. The bank statement I slit across the table. Watching Celestine's breath hitch as she recognized it, her eyes widening with dawning horror. Alistair picked it up, his eyes scanning the damning page. His grip on the paper tightened, his knuckles turning white. Celestine, he said slowly, his voice laced with disbelief and a profound sense of betrayal. This is your accountant. Celestine's panic was palpable now, her eyes darting around the room like a cornered animal. I can explain. I leaned back in my chair, a grim satisfaction settling in my chest. You've been stealing from Mom for years, I stated calmly, and she blamed me for it. Silence fell over the table, thick and suffocating, broken only by Celestine's ragged breathing. Beatrice's lips parted, but for the first time no words came out. Then finally she spoke, her voice barely a whisper, filled with a dawning horror. Is that true, Celestine? Celestine opened her mouth, but I already knew whatever flimsy excuse she offered next would irrevocably change everything. For the first time in my life, my father stood up not for Beatrice, but for me. And for the first time, my mother's carefully constructed world began to crumble around her. Celestine's eyes darted frantically around the room, searching for an escape, for some way to twist this damning revelation in her favor. But there was no way out. Mom, she's twisting things. She stammered, her voice losing its usual sharp edge, replaced by a desperate plea. She's making it sound worse than it is. Alistair didn't even glance at me. His unwavering focus remained on Celestine, the bank statement still clutched tightly in his fist. Tell me the truth, Celestine, he demanded, his voice low and dangerous. Celestine's lips trembled. I needed the money. I was going to pay it back. Beatrice's expression was unreadable, a carefully constructed wall of shock and disbelief. But I saw the almost imperceptible tension in her shoulders, the way her jaw tightened with suppressed fury. You let me throw Lily out of this house over a lie, she said quietly, her voice laced with a dangerous calm. Celestine's breath hitched. You wouldn't have believed me anyway. I watched as Beatrice's carefully maintained mask started to crack, revealing the raw fury and betrayal beneath. Her mind was clearly racing, calculating, figuring out the best way to bury this devastating truth. She wouldn't admit she was wrong. She never did. I don't care about the past, Beatrice finally said, her voice regaining a semblance of control, smoothing back into its usual authoritative tone. What matters is what happens next. Alistair's hand slammed onto the polished table, rattling the silverware with a sharp, decisive clatter. No, he stated firmly, his voice resonating with a newfound conviction. What matters is the truth. The very air in the room seemed to shift, a palpable change in the power dynamics. For the first time in my life, my father wasn't just a silent bystander. Lily was right all along, he declared, his voice steady, almost too calm. Beatrice's gaze snapped to him, her eyes wide with disbelief and dawning panic. What are you saying, Alistair? I'm saying, Alistair continued, his gaze unwavering, that I'm done turning a blind eye. Celestine let out a nervous, brittle laugh. Oh, come on, Dad, this is ridiculous. I leaned back in my chair, a small, knowing smile playing on my lips, watching Beatrice's carefully composed expression start to waver, the cracks in her facade widening. If you don't believe me, Dad, I suggested calmly, check the financial records yourself. Beatrice exhaled sharply, a sound of pure exasperation. This is absurd. You're making a spectacle out of absolutely nothing. But it was already too late. Alistair wasn't listening to her anymore. He pushed back his chair, the scraping sound loud in the sudden silence, and stood. I want the truth, he stated, his voice resolute, and I'm going to find it. Beatrice didn't stop him. She couldn't. For the first time in their long and complicated marriage, my father walked away from my mother and toward me instead. The hallway was dimly lit, the flickering glow of the antique chandelier casting long dancing shadows against the patterned wallpaper. I heard the soft, deliberate click of heels behind me, before Beatrice's voice slithered through the silence, laced with a desperate warning. You don't know what you're doing, Lily, she murmured, her breath hot on the back of my neck. I turned, meeting her gaze without a flicker of hesitation. No, Mom, I corrected her, my voice steady and devoid of emotion. You don't... She took a step closer, her voice softening, becoming almost seductive, but with an underlying edge of razor-sharp threat. You think you've won, don't you? You have absolutely no idea what I'm capable of. And I held my ground, refusing to be intimidated. She leaned in, her breath cool against my cheek, her eyes glittering with a dangerous intensity. You should have stayed gone, Lily, she whispered, her voice low and menacing. Because now there's no going back. I didn't flinch, I didn't speak. I simply turned and walked away, leaving her standing there in the dim light, her carefully constructed world crumbling around her. The game wasn't over, it was just getting started. The cozy cafe was warm and inviting, the rich aroma of roasted coffee beans thick in the air. Rain drizzled softly against the large window beside me, Seattle's ever-present gloom somehow making the warm glow of the pendant lights above feel almost intimate. Celestine sat across from me, her hands wrapped around a steaming latte she hadn't even touched. She looked different. Not physically, but in the way she held herself. Less smug, more subdued, almost cautious. I want to make things right, she said, her voice softer, more hesitant than I ever remembered hearing it. I leaned back in my chair, studying her carefully, my expression unreadable. Do you? She exhaled sharply, a sound of weary resignation. Look, Lily, I know I messed up, okay? But I was trapped, just like you were, Mom. She controls everything. You think I had a choice? I scoffed, the sound sharp and incredulous. You always had a choice, Celestine. You just preferred the considerable benefits of staying firmly on her side. Celestine flinched as if I had physically struck her. I was scared, Lily. You don't know what it's like. Oh, I don't. I cut in, my voice, laced with bitter sarcasm. Funny, I seem to vividly remember being the one kicked out into the pouring rain while you stood comfortably inside watching. She winced, looking down at her untouched coffee, her shoulders slumping slightly. I deserve that, she murmured, the words barely audible. A heavy silence hung between us for a long moment. I almost believed her remorse was genuine. Almost. So why now? I asked, my eyes narrowed, watching her every subtle reaction. What changed? Her apartment was smaller than I expected, a far cry from the sprawling opulence of our family home, but still stylish, almost aggressively so. Tastefully decorated in cool grays and blues, as if she were trying too hard to project an image of stability she clearly didn't possess. Celestine poured 2 glasses of a surprisingly good Pinot Noir, handing me one with a nervous gesture. I want us to talk, she said, her voice unusually soft, almost pleading. I took the glass but didn't drink. All right, talk. She hesitated, her gaze flickering around the room, avoiding mine. Mom, she's struggling more than she lets on. I thought maybe if we... Her expensive phone buzzed on the glass coffee table, the screen lighting up with a message. Is she there? The sender's name flashed across the screen. Beatrice. I deliberately set my wine glass down on the table, the delicate clink echoing in the sudden tension. You never meant a single word you just said, did you, Celestine? Celestine stiffened, her eyes widening with a panicked defensiveness. It's not like that, Lily. I picked up her phone and turned the screen toward her, the damning message glowing brightly. Then explain this. She swallowed hard, her fingers tightening around her wine glass, her knuckles white. Mom just wants to talk, she said quickly, too quickly. That's all. I laughed, the sound cold and sharp, devoid of any warmth. She doesn't talk, Celestine. She manipulates. She twists reality until you're not even sure which way is up, and you... I gestured to her with a dismissive wave of my hand. You were always her favorite puppet. Celestine stood, moving towards me, a desperate plea in her eyes, but I held up a hand, stopping her in her tracks. Don't, I warned, my voice low and dangerous. She exhaled, shaking her head in exasperation. You don't understand, Lily. No, I corrected her, my voice steady and controlled. I do. And I'll tell you this once, so listen carefully. If either of you ever try to pull me back into your toxic games again, I will destroy you both. Celestine's carefully constructed facade wavered, a flicker of genuine doubt crossing her eyes for the first time. But it wasn't enough. She forced a weak, defiant smirk. Then I guess we'll see who wins. I didn't reply. I had already made my decision. Beatrice had played her last card. Now it was my turn. I sat in the quiet solitude of my apartment, my fingers resting lightly on the cool rim of my wine glass, the glittering city lights stretched out beyond the panoramic window. A breathtaking tapestry of urban life. But something felt subtly off. A nagging unease that prickled at the edges of my awareness, like the unsettling sensation of being watched. I shook it off, dismissing it as mere paranoia. Paranoia was a dangerous thing, a creeping vine that could easily choke out any semblance of peace. I wasn't about to let it sink its poisonous tendrils into me. Then 3 sharp, insistent knocks echoed through the apartment. I stood, my heartbeat slow but heavy with a sudden, inexplicable apprehension. I wasn't expecting anyone. When I opened the door, Celestine stood there, drenched to the bone, her face pale and etched with a raw inspiration. It's over, she breathed, her voice barely a whisper. I didn't move, my expression carefully neutral. Define over, Celestine. She swallowed hard, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation, leaving a trail of water on my polished hardwood floors. Mom, she's lost everything. I tilted my head slightly, my eyebrows raised in silent inquiry. And what exactly does that mean for me? Celestine hesitated, her gaze darting nervously around my apartment, a stark contrast to the opulent spaces she was accustomed to. Her office, Beatrice's office, it's a disaster zone. I pictured it vividly. Beatrice's pristine, meticulously organized workspace, once a powerful symbol of her control, now in utter chaos. Stacks of papers everywhere. Celestine continued, her voice trembling slightly. The smell of spilled whiskey. A group of executives standing around whispering, avoiding her eyes. Alistair was there too. His arms crossed the shift in power. It's undeniable. It's over, Celestine repeated, her voice flat. He told her she lost. A sharp, humorless laugh escaped Beatrice's lips, a sound devoid of any real amusement. You think I built all of this, clawed my way to the top, just to let you two pathetic creatures take it all away from me? Alistair's expression remained unchanged, a mask of quiet resolve. You did this to yourself, Beatrice. She began to pace her once imposing office. Her hands shaking visibly, but her voice, though strained, still held a thread of her former imperiousness. I still have leverage, she insisted, her eyes glinting with a desperate cunning. Alistair frowned, his confusion evident. What are you talking about? Beatrice turned to him, her eyes narrowed, radiating a dangerous intensity. If I go down, she said slowly, each word carefully enunciated. She's coming down with me. I should have known Beatrice wouldn't go quietly. When she called, her voice tight and urgent, I almost snorted, dismissing it as another manipulative ploy. But something in the pit of my stomach, a cold, unsettling premonition, told me this wasn't a conversation I could afford to avoid. I arrived at the designated meeting spot, an upscale lounge with dim lighting and an air of hushed exclusivity. Expensive art adorned the walls, and the low murmur of conversations mingled with the clinking of glasses. Beatrice was already seated at a secluded table in the back, a half-empty glass of deep red wine clutched in her hand, her expression unreadable in the soft ambient light. You look well, Lily, she said smoothly, her voice betraying none of the turmoil I knew she must be feeling. I sat down across from her, my gaze direct and unwavering. Cut the act, Beatrice. She sighed, swirling the remaining wine in her glass, the ruby liquid catching the light. Lily, we don't have to do this. We can fix it. Work together. A short, mirthless laugh escaped my lips. Work together like we did when you threw me out onto the street with nothing but a flimsy duffel bag and $200. She set her glass down on the table a little too hard, the sound sharp in the quiet space. That was a mistake. No, Beatrice, I corrected her, my voice cold and devoid of emotion. That was a choice. She inhaled deeply, then leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. You have no idea the kind of enemies you're making, Lily. I didn't flinch, meeting her gaze with unwavering resolve. And you, I countered, my voice equally low and dangerous, have absolutely no idea who you're dealing with. Beatrice's carefully constructed mask finally cracked a flicker of raw fury, contorting her features. You think you've won, don't you? She hissed, her voice laced with venom. You're still just a foolish, naive girl playing pretend. I smiled, a genuine, confident smile that reached my eyes. Then why do you look so scared, Beatrice? Her jaw clenched, her carefully applied makeup unable to completely conceal the fear that now flickered in her eyes. She was losing control, and she knew it. I stood adjusting the lapels of my perfectly tailored coat. Goodbye, Mother, I said, the title feeling foreign and hollow on my tongue. And for the first time, truly, she looked afraid. Beatrice had lost the game. Now it was time for her to face the consequences. The sterile scent of polished wood and expensive desperation hung heavy in the air of the high-powered law office. Beatrice sat rigid in the plush leather chair, her perfectly manicured nails tapping a slow, controlled rhythm against the armrest. Across from her, her impeccably dressed attorney nervously adjusted his tie, flipping through the daunting mountain of legal paperwork spread before them. This isn't good, Beatrice, he admitted, barely meeting her furious gaze. Beatrice scoffed, crossing her legs with a defiant air. I don't pay you for obvious statements, Arthur. I pay you to fix problems. Her attorney hesitated, his gaze fixed on the damning documents. Your assets are frozen, the lawsuits are piling up. If this goes to trial, you could... Beatrice cut him off with a sharp, dismissive wave of her hand. If I can't keep my money, Arthur, neither can he. She leaned forward, her voice lowering to a dangerous whisper. There are ways to make this go away. Maybe some crucial paperwork gets mysteriously lost. Maybe a deal is struck before. Before she could finish her thinly veiled threat, the heavy oak door swung open, revealing Alistair standing in the doorway. Beatrice stiffened her spine, snapping ramrod straight. He looked different, I realized, watching from the corner of the room. Stronger, steadier, the years of being overshadowed finally lifting from his shoulders. And then she saw what he was holding, a thick, unyielding manila folder. He placed it deliberately on the table in front of her, the weighty thud echoing in the tense silence. This is everything, Beatrice. he said, his voice calm, almost pitying. Every forged signature, every embezzled dollar, every single lie. Beatrice's fingers twitched a barely perceptible tremor, but she forced herself to remain outwardly composed. You can't do this to me, Alistair. Her lawyer cleared his throat uncomfortably, his gaze fixed on the floor. There's nothing left to fight for, Beatrice. For the first time in her life, no one was listening to Beatrice Renard. Celestine's once stylish apartment felt strangely hollow, devoid of the vibrant energy she used to project. The expensive furniture was still there, but the life had been inexplicably drained from the space. Half the carefully curated paintings were gone, replaced by blank patches on the wall, and a few haphazardly taped cardboard boxes sat forlornly in the corner. She sat slumped on the plush velvet couch, a nearly empty glass of wine clutched in her hand, her eyes vacant. I had everything, she murmured, her voice barely a whisper, filled with a profound sense of loss. And now I have nothing. I leaned against the doorway, watching her quiet unraveling. You had everything because you let her decide who you were. Celestine, I said softly, my voice devoid of judgment. Now you have nothing because without her, you don't know who that is. A brittle, humorless laugh escaped her lips. I thought I was different. I thought I was special. She shook her head slowly, a dawning realization in her eyes. But I was just another pawn in her twisted game. For the first time I saw it. Genuine regret, raw and exposed. She looked up at me, her eyes pleading, vulnerable. Then what am I supposed to do, Lily? I didn't answer. I simply turned and walked away, leaving her alone with the wreckage of her carefully constructed life. The courtroom was colder and more impersonal than I had imagined. Beatrice stood before the judge, her face a carefully blank mask, but I could see the almost imperceptible tension in her jaw, the rigid set of her shoulders. The prosecution laid out their case with meticulous precision. Fraud, tax, evasion, manipulation. The years of deceit finally dragged into the harsh glare of the law. Alistair spoke, his voice steady and clear, filled with a quiet conviction. She built an empire by ruining people, by controlling, deceiving, and discarding anyone who wasn't useful to her anymore. Beatrice didn't react, her gaze fixed straight ahead. I sat in the gallery, a silent observer. There was no joy in this. No sense of triumphant satisfaction, only a profound sense of finality. The judge straightened, lifting the heavy gavel. The court finds the defendant guilty, and just like that, my seemingly untouchable mother was no longer above the law. She had fought for power her entire life. Now she had none. The prison visitation room was sterile and cold white walls echoing with a faint institutional smell of bleach. It was the kind of place that stripped people bare, leaving only the stark reality of their choices. Beatrice sat across from me in an unflattering orange jumpsuit, her once meticulously styled hair dull and lifeless, her flawless complexion now etched with the harsh lines of her downfall. She looked smaller, more fragile than I had ever seen her. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. Then she exhaled, leaning forward slightly, a flicker of her old defiance in her eyes. You think you've won, Lily? Her voice still held a trace of the commanding woman. She used to be the one who never bowed, never yielded. But there was no real fight left in her. I tilted my head slightly, considering her words, then offered a small, almost sad smile. No, Beatrice, I said quietly. I just walked away. Her eyes flashed with a momentary spark of anger, but it quickly faded. You were never my weakness, continued my voice steady and calm. You were just my past. The cheap motel room smelled of stale cigarettes and lost hope. Celestine opened the door hesitantly. Her once perfect posture now slightly hunched, her designer clothes replaced by an oversized faded hoodie and leggings that looked like they hadn't been washed in days. I didn't think you'd come, she admitted, her voice raw and hoarse. I stepped inside, surveying the small, dimly lit room. It was a far cry from the luxurious apartments and sprawling mansions she used to inhabit. Why am I here, Celestine? I asked, my tone neutral, betraying none of the complex emotions churning within me. She sat down heavily on the edge of the worn bed, running a shaky hand through her tangled hair. Don't know who I am without her? She confessed, the raw vulnerability in her voice startling. There it was, the stark, painful truth. I watched her for a long moment, a flicker of something akin to pity stirring within me, quickly followed by a wave of self-preservation. You have two choices, Celestine, I said simply, my voice firm. Figure it out or don't. Either way, it's not my problem anymore. Her lips parted, searching for words for some way to draw me back into her orbit, but she found none. I turned toward the door, my hand on the cheap metal knob. I don't owe you anything, Celestine, I said over my shoulder, and for the first time I truly meant it. The view from my new office stretched out over the glittering city skyline, glass towers reflecting the warm golden hues of the setting sun. It felt different than any office I had ever been in before, because this one was mine. Earned through grit and determination, not inherited privilege. A soft knock at the door pulled me from my contemplative gaze. Alistair stood there, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, a hesitant, almost sheepish look in his eyes. "Nice place, Lily," he said quietly, his gaze sweeping over the modern minimalist decor. I nodded a small acknowledging gesture. "It is." A comfortable silence settled between us. A far cry from the strained, awkward silences of the past, shifted slightly. His gaze fixed on the city lights beyond the window. I wanted to say I know I failed you, Lily, terribly. I let out a slow breath, the weight of that long-held pain easing slightly. "Yeah, Dad," I said softly. "You did." Another moment of quiet understanding passed between us. He looked down at his shoes, then back up at me, a flicker of hope in his eyes. I'd like to fix things if you'll let me." I offered him a small, sad smile. But it wasn't an invitation to return to the way things used to be. Wounds ran too deep to ever fully heal. Some things can't be fixed. "Dad," I said gently. My voice filled with a quiet finality. He nodded once, a slow, understanding movement, and then he simply turned and left, leaving me alone with my hard-won peace. I turned back to the window, watching the city lights begin to twinkle against the darkening sky. No ghosts haunted this view. No lingering regrets clouded my vision. Only the vast open expanse of the future stretched before me. For the first time in my life, I owed nothing to anyone. Some scars never fully fade, serving as permanent reminders of past hurts. But that doesn't mean you have to keep looking at them endlessly, replaying the pain. The old letter was tucked away between dusty books, hidden in a drawer I hadn't opened in years. The paper had yellowed slightly at the edges, brittle with time, but my youthful handwriting was still bold and desperate. I unfolded it slowly, my eyes scanning the familiar words I had once poured out to Beatrice. "I just want to understand why I don't know what I did wrong. Please just tell me the truth." I exhaled sharply, a quiet, almost rueful laugh escaping my lips. I had begged for answers, for acknowledgement, for her to simply see me. I had needed her validation with a fierce, aching desperation. Now, years later, I didn't need anything from her at all. Without a moment's hesitation, I crumpled the fragile letter and tossed it into the fireplace. The hungry flames curled around the aged paper, turning the painful remnants of the past into nothing but swirling ash. I watched it burn, feeling nothing. "I spent too many years waiting for something that was never coming," I murmured to the empty room. "I'm done waiting." The quiet hum of the morning rush had subsided in the cozy coffee shop. Celestine sat across from me, her fingers wrapped around a chipped ceramic mug, her nails bare and uneven. A stark contrast to the perfectly manicured hands that used to flaunt designer handbags and an air of effortless perfection. She didn't ask for money, didn't offer a litany of excuses. She simply sighed, a sound of genuine weariness, and said, "I messed up, Lily. I really messed up." I stirred my latte slowly, watching her, my expression carefully neutral. "Yeah, Celestine," I acknowledged quietly, "you did." A weak, almost self-deprecating laugh escaped her lips. She shook her head slowly. "You're not going to make this easy, are you?" I took a sip of my coffee, the warmth a small comfort against the lingering chill of the past. "Was it ever easy for me, Celestine?" She looked down at her mug, nodding slowly, a flicker of understanding in her eyes. "No," she admitted softly. "No, it wasn't. I didn't expect forgiveness, Lily. I guess I wanted you to know. I see it now. Everything I did, everything I let happen." There was a time when those words would have mattered, a time when I would have clung to them, desperate for some sign of remorse. Now they were just words hanging in the air between us, carrying the weight of years of betrayal. "What now?" she asked, her voice quieter, almost lost in the gentle murmur of the coffee shop. I glanced out the window, watching the city move forward relentlessly, just as I had learned to do. "I don't know, Celestine," I said honestly, my gaze returning to hers. "But whatever it is, I'll be fine." And for the first time, Celestine didn't argue. The thick contract in front of me was filled with dense legal jargon, intricate details, and impressive numbers. A year ago, the sheer volume of it might have intimidated me, filled me with self-doubt. Now I reached for the elegant pen without a second thought, my hands steady and sure. "You sure about this, Miss Renard?" The seasoned investor sitting across from me asked, a hint of admiration in his voice. I smiled, a genuine, confident smile that radiated from within. Absolutely, I built this, every single inch of it. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. As I signed my name at the bottom of the final page, a profound sense of relief washed over me quickly, followed by something deeper. Something far more significant: freedom. I stood walking over to the expansive window of my new office, high above the sprawling city. The glittering skyline stretched out before me, a canvas of endless possibilities, waiting just beyond the glass. For the first time in my life, I wasn't looking back, wasn't running from anything anymore. I was exactly where I belonged. Life has a way of teaching us invaluable lessons, often through the hardest, most painful experiences. But if there's one fundamental truth I've learned through it all, it's this: you are not defined by the people who hurt you. You are not bound to the past that tried to break you. You are so much more than the pain, more than the betrayal, more than the insidious voices that whispered you weren't enough. Walking away wasn't just about physically leaving behind toxic relationships. It was about reclaiming my own power, about understanding that closure isn't a gift someone else bestows upon you. It's something you cultivate within yourself. The very moment I stopped waiting for apologies that would never come, for justice that felt elusive, for validation from people incapable of giving it, was the moment I truly became free. Maybe you've been in a similar situation, dear listener. Maybe you've placed your trust in the wrong hands, held onto something or someone that consistently held you back. Maybe you've spent countless years waiting for a change that never materialized. If you take just one thing away from my story, let it be this: you don't need permission to start over. You don't need someone else to acknowledge your inherent worth. You already possess it. And the instant you truly realize that, that's when everything begins to change. Now, I'd love to hear from you. Have you ever had to make the difficult decision to walk away from something or someone for the sake of your own peace? Was there a pivotal moment in your life when you finally realized you deserved better? Share your experiences in the comments below. Drop a 1 if this story resonated with you, or tell me where you're watching from. I'd love to connect with you. And if you didn't quite connect with the story, please let me know why. Your feedback truly matters. If you found value in this video, please make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next story. There's always more to tell, and I can't wait to share it with you. Until next time, remember, your past doesn't define you, but what you choose to do next. That's what truly matters.